Good afternoon. Welcome to this edition of Finweek Money Matters. This is the show that helps you manage your finances. I'm Samantha Loring, my co-host today, Finweek Deputy Editor Tandisizwe Mahlutshana and Finweek journalist Jessica Hubbard. Now, South Africa's property market shows its highest return of 15.2% in 2012. That's since the 2008-2009 global financial crisis. One company who's taken full advantage of the uptick is Rebosis Property Fund. We'll be talking to them about the outlook for their portfolio in light of an economy where we have, of course, seen growth forecasts being downgraded. We've got the CEO, Sisa, Ngebulana, on his success story first and foremost, and then we'll talk about property with him. He's standing by. How much can be made from the game of kings? We get into the field of investment in the sport of polo, that ahead of the BMW International Polo Series this week, Sunday. Finally, we'll take a look at business rescue and its role here in South Africa. If you have any comments for us, you can send them through to moneymatters@abn360.com. Well, the story of Rebosis CEO Sisa Ngebulana is a fantastical and it's also inspirational. Born to a family of general dealers in Umtata in the former Transkei, Ngebulana harnessed his entrepreneurial spirit through a series of business ventures that eventually saw him build a property fund worth 4 billion rand. For more on this success story, the lessons learned, and more on the property space, we're joined by the man himself, Sisa Ngebulana, CEO of Rebosis, and Leon Allison, property analyst at Macquarie. Thank you both for joining us today. It's great to have you with us. So Sisa, I mean, just reading through the story, you went through quite a long process to get to the point where you actually, in fact, started your property fund. So perhaps you could just spend a minute telling us about where you came from and how you got to the point of actually, making a success of yourself in the property industry here in South Africa.
Well, thanks. I think you've just mentioned briefly I was born in Umtata. Grew up with grandparents. Old man passed on when I was a little child. And they ran a general dealer store outside Umtata. And they had some brick fields, so I used to spend a lot of time in the brick fields and would go to sites, deliver the bricks, and spend time with brick layers and home builders. And that's really how I got liking into property. So I learned bricklaying, plastering, and carpentry. I had particular liking to carpentry all my life. But as it were, I studied law and I became a lawyer. And during my post-degree studies at Natal, I registered an estate agency board exam and I sold some homes. And invariably every home needed some refurb or some changes, and I attended to all of that, which was quite the building experience gave me a good insight into how you can actually change something, because I sold every home really I sat on a Sunday, because this was a Sunday affair, but I ended up part-timely during the week renovating homes and dotting them up for my potential purchasers. So I was able to even finance my studies, pay my student loans, and I bought myself a car, and then I did articles with Janus de Villiers in Cape Town, spent some time with them as an attorney, and I think during my articles, I just couldn't afford to even pay insurance for my car with measly salary of about 800 Rand a month, with a flat of 300, food for 300, and train fare for 95 Rand. I was left with very little. So I then borrowed a trailer from one of the flat owners around and started transporting people on weekends from flats around Sea Pond, Green Pond, and that sort of thing. And I was able to make some bit of money, which was threefold my salary. And I think that's really my background as a lawyer. Yeah. And I've had some successes, failures. I had some failed transport business. But I think every failure just became another window for me of opportunity, because I owed money to somebody, and invariably I had to pay it back. And the only way to pay it back was to look at other avenues of how you can really, change your life and do something better to be able to pay up to that. And I remember back joining Eskom was my ex-client when I was in legal practice as an attorney. I joined them as a legal counsel. And I was earning about 10,000 Rand a month. And I had a debt, after I sold my trucks in auction, I had a debt just over 1 million Rand. And the bond I could afford back then was about 230,000 Rand. over 30 years repayment. So R1 million was just a far cry. I had to do something about my life to be able to pay that, and I had 3 years to do that. And I started, that's what led me to spec building of homes back then.
Yeah, I mean, just one thing before we get into the property space, because I think it is important, I suppose, a lesson, as you go along your career, how business can become quite shady is working with Jannes de Villiers. This was a company that was involved in fraud, essentially, defrauded many pensioners out of their money. So what do you take out of that experience while you're working at that particular employer?
It wasn't necessarily Jannes de Villiers who was involved in that. It was, I'm just thinking of the name now. It was a case which we're handling as lawyers, where pensioners had been defrauded. So we're representing the liquidators. And one of the liquidators was one of the partners in the law firm. And I think because of the kind of fees that the guys charged, they were then caught up in the process where the legal bills were now getting so high that, in fact, there were almost a tenth of the amount to be recovered from the from what was lost. So, and I think that's how they got embroiled into the fact that they were actually in this for the fees, not just for the best interests of the pensioners in recovering the money. Yeah, it was a master bond matter.
So there we go. That's clearing that issue up there. But Tandisizwe, I mean, you wrote the article right now. Your sense as to what you take away from how Sisa has built up the company to what it is today, 4 billion rand market cap.
I think it was important for Finweek to just capture an inspiring story and package it in a way that other entrepreneurs or deal makers could learn from. I think that one of the platforms that successful businessmen or deal makers or entrepreneurs like Sisa don't get is to tell a story of where they come from. Oftentimes when a young and upcoming businessman, entrepreneur or deal maker, a lot of the times they only look at the person at that level and forgetting that it takes steps to get to that level. I come across a lot of people that start businesses and, the targets is I want to make 10 million over the next 5 years. If you listen to Sisa's story, he owed million after million, from one business dying to the next. And essentially when I spoke to him, he said one of the things that he would like, one of the messages that he would like to send out is, if you want to start a business and if you want to be successful, you have to have your fundamentals right. And if your fundamentals are not right, you are simply taking a shot in the dark. And I think that is why you have a lot of people who start businesses and they simply don't go anywhere, because the dreams are just too high and too much to realize that it's a process and you have to take certain steps. So I thought if it's a voice that comes from someone who's actually walked the road, who's not just simply talking a talk, but just actually walk the walk, I thought it would be an inspiring story to our readers.
And just to jump in there, Sam, what I found very interesting about the story of Sisa and what I think other big CEOs can learn from is the fact that he's trying to help youth-led businesses. So instead of just using the old suspects to help his business along, he's really trying to promote youth employment and youth development. And I think that's very important in this economy.
So how does that fit into your strategy right now, and how is it expensive for you to be able to upskill people?
No, I think it's actually a very straightforward thing. I think you just got to be conscious of it, because our businesses, we outsource quite a lot of work. And I think it's easy to just get the established companies, get the work done. But it's one thing to insist that they actually take along some smaller businesses.
So how does it, what's the mechanism when you talk about, is it just, specific businesses that you try and approach and you try and incorporate businesses that are led by youths in South Africa, or you try and hire youths in South Africa?
I think it stems from the belief that, you look at a country like ours, high unemployment, etc., and you look at economies that have been able to generate employment, it's through small businesses, entrepreneur type businesses. And it's really up to us as leaders in business to be able to harness upcoming businesses and try and help them out so that they can, because they're real employers at the end of the day who really take the people off the streets.
Yeah.
And I think that we need mechanisms like that.
Leon, let's get you into the conversation here, because you look at the likes of Rebosis relative to the bigger players in the industry. I mean, the likes of Growth Point, obviously the biggest property company, listed property company. What's your assessment of their assets right now, how they're managing them in the broader South African property space?
Yeah, I would say the quality of their assets and income stream is at least the same quality as the sector average. And what I look at there is the long lease profile, lease expiry profile. That means they've got stability in income. And then also they've got among the lowest vacancy rates in the sector, which is, to me, is another indicator. Yet the share is trading at a significant higher yield or discount rating to the sector average. So the sector at the moment, if you buy the sector stocks now, on average, you'll get an 8% income return or yield in year one. And for Rebosis, it's around 10%. So, I think that's a bit of a harsh rating, and it actually presents a bit of an opportunity.
So you're seeing the opportunity there to invest. Sisa, tell us about the plans now. You've got this 4 billion rand market cap. You're still having to compete for certain, property tenders with bigger players in South Africa, but you are a substantial player in your own right now. So what are the plans to grow your portfolio?
We listed Rebosis about 2.5 years ago. We listed with an asset base of about 3.6 billion. We've grown that to about 5.4 billion. We're about 5.4 billion now. In 2 weeks, we're taking transfer of another portfolio of about 1.1 billion. So, you're looking at a company with an asset base of about 6.5 billion. Our year end is end of August. That's really where we are. Market cap is about 4 billion at the moment. With the properties that we're taking transfer of, there's a vendor placement of about 300 million, which would then add to the number of units that in issue, which will take us to about 4.3, call it that, billion against assets of 6.5. So we've delivered on what we promised to the market. We're still coming out. Our numbers will be released after year end by October. We're coming within our focus range, as we said to the market. We released our 6 months results in February this year, after February, 6 months. And we have about 30% total return to the market. And with the end, depends on where the share price closes at the end of August. But from an income growth perspective, we in line with our focus. So we've delivered what we promised to the market. We
so what's next? What's next? I mean, you're bringing in just over 1 billion rand in assets right now. What type of properties are coming into the group?
Well, let me start with what we've taken transfer of this year. We bought an industrial property down in Joburg for colleges around 120 million rand. We bought another shopping centre, a nice, good regional dominant centre in Pretoria called Sunny Park in the Sunnyside area. Nicely upgraded, even though it's 30 years old, but actually looks brand new because it's just been revamped, highly modernized. It really is a great center. That's about 580 million rand acquisition, which we took transfer of also in June. And the buildings that we also taking transfer of now, about 5 buildings, with they're really beautiful glass buildings, and between Joburg and Pretoria. They're really outstanding buildings with long lease profiles, largely let to government. And we're really excited about that because it gives us the defensive income stability that the fund prides itself on.
You also mentioned that you're expanding into Africa, and that's quite a lot of, there's opportunity there. Is that going to be a strategic focus going forward?
Yeah, I think, let me distinguish. So that's Rebosis. Rebosis is the income fund that we continue to grow, and our investors benefit from the income growth that they receive and the capital returns that they receive from there. We have another business which I also run as CEO, Billion Group, which is the developer. Rebosis, on the other hand, enjoys the first right of refusal to what Billion develops. As and when Billion decides to sell a property, it has a right to put its hand up first. So we're doing a couple of regional malls in the country, and I think largely we've got the most prized regional assets under development in South Africa. Forest Steel in Pretoria, Southwest. It's opening in April next year. It's about 75,000 square meter GLA, quite a big center. about 1.6 billion rand worth. It's opening in April next year. It's on program, and it really has got all the nationals and international brands into it. Got another one in P called Bay West, 90,000 square meter. Another one in Mthatha. So part of the development pipeline includes the foray into the lovely continent in Africa. Ghana being one of those, Nigeria, Angola, and Uganda.
Okay.
So between those, there's about 12 centers of a smaller size, not regional centers. They and primarily because of the lack of infrastructure in roads. So the kind of drive time you work on in South African standards is very different there, because your 10-minute drive time is not a typical 5 kilometers. There it's much less than that. So hence you can't build bigger centers. And Africa is under retail, so we're capitalizing on that opportunity. So we might put a fund, whether it's listed fund or whether it's private fund, but we'll put a fund in which case it'd be an African-based fund where it's under retail,
listed,
under the retail stock.
Planning on listing.
It might be listed, it might be unlisted, but certainly all the investors who are investors to Rebosis would participate in that fund direct or through Rebosis.
Leon, just a question for you. Now, looking at the Rebosis stock, there are some good defensive elements to it, like retail, and I think the section where you have government tenants or tenants, government as tenants, who tend to take long leases and they hardly default on their payments. So that's a good buffer. But the only thing that has sort of not happened is that the share price has not managed to sort of move above the initial listing level of 10 rands. I do understand that it's also a function of the sector. The sector is coming off a little bit from the highs that we've seen over the past few years. But why, looking at Rebosis specifically, has it not been able to move?
Sure, it's a difficult question to answer. Look, it could be a few reasons. I guess it's one of the smaller illiquid stocks. So for the large institutions, it's difficult to come into the market and buy big chunks of shares. And because Rebosis have needed capital to fund this growth profile, the large institutions, I suspect, have been happy to wait on the sidelines instead of going into the market, putting upward pressure on the price. They've waited for these capital raises. That way there's no market impact, you get it at a bit of a discount as well. Maybe there's some concern, there's been some negative publicity about government office leases, and I also think there one needs to look at each case on its own merit. So it could be various reasons.
You think it's a good buy right now?
I think there's some upside potential, yeah.
Thank you for joining us today. Appreciate your time. Certainly very interesting about your strategy around smaller shopping centres as opposed to the larger regional ones in Africa. That is Sisa Ngebulana, CEO of Rebosis, Leon Allison, property analyst at Macquarie. It's time now for our trade of the week. Well, the trade of the week this week is MTN. Are we going long or short on that?
We're definitely going long. We're definitely going long. I mean,
the stock's down 1% this week, and it has been all over the place as of late.
Yeah, I think it was encouraging to see it, flirting with the 200 rand mark. But I think, the numbers are growing nicely. Iran is coming along nicely. They are. There are good discussions in terms of the sanctions, and the CEO Sisa actually believes that there will be resolutions that will be reached by the end of this year.
But he said at the result, I've got to step in there. At the results, he was saying that he's feeling more pessimistic now than he was at the beginning of the year on trying to get money out there. So that is not a given.
Yeah, the issue of trying to get money, out of Iran has been, I suppose, it's been giving them headaches. But I spoke to him before. I wrote another piece about Sasol recently about, what is he staying in Iran? Is he wanting to get out? And he said, definitely we're not getting out of Iran. And I also put the question to him about getting money out of Iran that they've been struggling to. And he says, well, they've been having discussions with the U.S. Treasury, the South African Reserve Bank. And, he said, I believe that we will have reached a resolution by the end of this year. But I think that looking at the company per se, they're expecting to add another 2 million over the 205 million subscriber base that they already have. And I think that's an encouraging number. Data revenue is also coming out nicely. I think it's up about 40% over the last reported period. So going long, I think there are good prospects to make money on the share.
There we go, that MTN stock. Remember that if you'd like to read any of these articles, Finweek is on shelves from today. It's available digitally in Afrikaans and English as well, that on mysubs.co.za. Time now to pay the bills. We'll be straight back after the short break. Well, the annual BMW Polo International Series is one of Joburg's most highly anticipated social events, with the day always turning out to be the who's who of Johannesburg. Yet instead of focusing on the fine wine and fashion, Finweek this week looks into where the real action is. That's on the field, also known as the Game of Kings. Today we're taking a look at polo in South Africa and where there are any real business opportunities and development opportunities to be explored in this space, and more broadly on the African continent. Brad Gibbon, a former Springbok and South African Polo Association Exco member, and Craig James, Ananda Polo Club manager and instructor, both with us at the desk. Thank you both for joining us. Craig, let's start off with you. Talk to us about the size of the polo industry here in South Africa, because I suppose we're not in the UK where there's tradition, there's a history there, there's a different also group of people, different kind of income groups and everything you're talking about, this being quite an elitist sport. Is it elitist in South Africa? Is it exclusive?
Well, yes, it is an expensive sport. But in South Africa, we've done quite a lot of work in trying to broaden the opportunities for people to get involved. At Inanda, we started a polo academy, you can call it. And this sort of opens the doors to a much broader spectrum of people. You don't have to buy a whole string of horses and run your whole operation. You can come in and rent your time, which has made it a lot more accessible for people. Polo on a whole, as an industry in South Africa, I think is on the up. There are a lot more polo members joining in annually. There are events like the Africa Cup, which we can maybe talk about later, which are sort of getting the game out there to people. And this is attracting sponsorship. With a sponsorship, obviously, an industry can grow. So definitely there has been a growth.
Yeah. So Brad, you chose the team, in fact, that's playing on a Sunday, and you are an ex-Springbok player and you're part of the Exco now. What's the state of the industry like as, relative to other sports in South Africa? I mean, it's small, but what's the state of it in terms of, whether people are making money in it?
Well, currently there's about 500 registered players in South Africa. Compared to England, it's I think over 3,000 or 4,000. There have been some tough times with obviously the recession, so it's been a little bit of a tough run. But it's definitely on the up. As Craig said, there's new events, new sponsors, so it's in good shape. It's in very good shape.
And are there initiatives being undertaken to bring, say, previously disadvantaged players into the game and give them the opportunity to play and give them the chance to develop and get involved?
There are. The SAPA, the South African Polo Association, spend a large amount of the money they make every year and put it back into development. A prime example was Spoel Duma, who unfortunately met with an untimely death last year. He was one of the projects that came through the ranks. He represented South Africa, so yes, a large amount of money.
Where did he get to? I mean, how well did he do?
He got to a 3 handicap. He actually won the MVP at his first international that he played in down in Kurland. And he also travelled abroad, played in Africa, played in England, played in Argentina. So, yeah, he was definitely one of the great success stories.
Let's try and get people like me excited. I have to say that I've managed to get a ticket to go see the whole thing on Sunday. And I've never been to one before. I have no idea what to expect, and I have to explain to my partner or the person that I'm taking along with me what to expect, because we simply don't know. We've done the research, but we just don't know what to expect. What can we expect?
Well, I think it's going to be a great day out. Every year the international gets bigger and bigger. It's a great crowd of people that go. It's quite a highlight of the social calendar annually, and it has grown over the years. I think you can expect a lot of glitz and glam, fast horses on the field, maybe some dust, possibly, champagne flowing. You can expect a great day out.
Let's talk about ownership in South Africa. I mean, who owns the horses? Are they is it wealthy people that individually own horses? I mean, how does the ownership structure and who's invested in the polo in South Africa predominantly?
Well, you see, South Africa is sort of very unique as opposed to the rest of the world. It was primarily a very sort of amateur thing where people had their own horses. Initially, it was something that the farmers did, so that's why a lot of the polo was out in the rural areas. But since obviously, times have changed, the farmers' sons have decided to go and become doctors and lawyers and all that sort of thing in the cities. So that sort of also gave rise to a professional sort of era where people could actually become professional polo players. Mm-hmm. In South Africa, it's not as big. A lot of those guys have left to go overseas. So it's mostly amateur players in South Africa with a sort of a professional element to it, but it's all people own their own horses.